pleasure to welcome you to another wild and woolly edition of the Daily Power Parsha. This is our daily look at the Torah portion, 15 minutes or so of inspiration, daily inspiration, to get you supercharged in middle of your day at high noon. Okay, so I've muted everybody, but that's not because I don't want to hear you. It's only because we like to keep a calm and steady, quiet background for the session. If you want to ask a question or if you want to add something to the conversation at any point, unmute yourself or you can raise your hand and I'm happy to unmute you if it's easier that way. Either way, I'd love a dialogue and an interaction for this piece, but I'm just muting it in the beginning just to kind of keep things a little bit quiet. Okay, so as those that have been here for the last few days know, so this Torah portion, the Torah portion this week is actually a double header. We have Tazria and Metzora. The main focus of the Torah portion is the affliction of tsaras. One thing is fascinating with tsaras. Tsaras is usually translated as leprosy, but we know, of course, that it's not based on what it looked like, based on where it went, based on how it was diagnosed and dealt with. We know that it wasn't a physical thing, it was a spiritual thing that pretty much existed back in more ancient times. It doesn't really exist today, and it was because of various indiscretions that it appeared. One thing that I want to mention is that, okay, let's try to figure out a good example. I think I have a good example to share with you. You know, if a person eats very healthy, right? A person eats very careful about what goes into their body, and then they splurge on something oily, greasy, fatty, whatever, so their skin might break out with something. Correct? It's possible, yeah? Yeah, if it's very clear otherwise, and you somehow do some, not so clean, not so pure intake, it could affect the skin. But what happens if a person constantly has that sort of thing in their diet? So what might happen is their body might get used to it, and it might not break out anymore with it because, it's used to it. Are you with me? I don't know if it's a good example, but I think it's an example, whether it's 100% true or not. I want to bring out this idea that sometimes the more pure something is, the more noticeable a problem is on the surface, because otherwise it's so pure inside. Yes? Whereas when it's not pure through and through, then you don't even notice it on the outside. It's all the way on the inside already. It's not just surface, it's already through and through. Yes? Make sense? Okay, this is why the mystics explain we don't have tsaras today. Why don't we have tsaras today? Because back in the day, they were so spiritually pure that anytime they gossiped or they talked ill of someone else, immediately their skin broke out, because that blemish was surface deep, only surface deep. But today, we're far from Sinai, at least, chronologically, many years. We're far from Moses, far from the Exodus and the revelation at Sinai, all that good stuff. And look, the reality is that we're maybe not as spiritually pure through and through as we used to, and therefore it's not just affecting our skin. It's already set in to some extent. By the way, I'm not trying to be depressing or negative here. I'm just trying to share the one of the explanations or one of the insights into the idea of tsaras. Tsaras was a malady that hit the skin because of the purity. By the way, I will tell you that if you ask me, and you may have heard me say this in previous classes in different contexts, maybe in a Kabbalah and Coffee class on Sunday mornings. By the way, if you're not yet joining us for Sunday mornings at 9:30 a.m., join us Sunday morning, every Sunday morning, 9:30 a.m. for Kabbalah and Coffee. But after that commercial, let me get back to this idea. I think I've shared this before, the notion that the world is constantly evolving, actually for the better, and the way we see that, although human beings, again, sometimes our negative behavior maybe within ourselves individually has taken root, or maybe not just skin deep, but I'll tell you, on a universal level, on a humanity level, it's my contention and other I've seen this in other sources as well, that it seems sometimes that the world is getting worse. People are getting worse, and there's this violence and this war and that problem and that atrocity, whatever, God forbid. And the negative is negative, and it's not positive. However, I will tell you, we live in a time where when somebody commits a wrong, more than any other time in history, it's called out. It's called out, and there's hopefully, more often than not, there's some sort of justice that is applied, and that's a big deal, because for many okay, without getting too much into the details on this, but not that many years ago, maybe even a decade ago, maybe even 5 years ago, people could get away with things. Let's say in the workplace, men and women, etc. Right? People could get away with things that today we call out as inappropriate. Now, here's the question: was it inappropriate then? Yeah. So how come it wasn't called out as inappropriate? Because it was so part of the normative behavior. It was so normal, let's say, right, that no one thought to call it out. In other words, it was so endemic, it was so part of life, that it didn't appear on the surface, because it wasn't just surface deep. I think as we evolve, as the generations evolve, as we become more, more aware, more sensitive, more whatever, so the wrongs and the things that aren't so right, they're more noticeable. We notice them a little bit more, and we call them out. Okay, so that's a little bit of an insight into why the tzaras, why that ailment affected the skin. Why skin? To indicate that it was only skin deep, and deeper than that, it hadn't set in. Okay, let's talk about another interesting wrinkle in the laws of tzaras. Now, in a moment, I'm going to share my screen, and we'll pull up some verses. But in general, as you know, for those again that have joined us over the last several days, so you know that when somebody has tzaras, the first thing they do is they call the kohen. They go to the kohen and they ask the kohen to check it out. And if the kohen deems it impure, he says, "Yeah, you got it. It's impure. It's no good. It's tzaras." And you have to go outside the camp and go in quarantine, go in isolation. What's interesting is the Talmud asked the question: well, what happens if a kohen gets tzaras, or has something on the skin that appears like tzaras? Again, if someone gets it, they go to the kohen. What if a kohen himself gets it? So who do you go to? Right? Can the kohen, let me ask the question very directly, can a kohen self-diagnose? Is it kosher for a kohen to self-diagnose? You feel free to unmute yourself and weigh in. What do you think? Can a kohen self-diagnose?
Isn't there a second kohen that can go to?
Yeah, but I'm saying, let's say this kohen is one that others have gone to. Can this kohen look at himself and say, yeah, either yay or nay? What do you think? Does he have to go to another kohen? What do you think?
I think he has to go to another kohen.
Okay, by raise of hand, who thinks he can self-diagnose? By raise of hand, who thinks he cannot self-diagnose? Okay, so we're split. I'll tell you, the Talmud says he's not allowed to self-diagnose. Okay, why not? Why can't he self-diagnose? Although he's a qualified kohen, 100% legit, he's diagnosed many, many other cases of tzaras, so he seems pretty qualified for the job. Why can't he diagnose himself? The Talmud says, listen to this line. It's a line that's true in life, not just in this regard. It says that a person can notice all blemishes except for their own. It says a person sees everyone else's faults. Easy to spot. Yeah, you got this problem, you got that problem, you have this area that you need to work on, that area you need to improve on. Everyone's an expert with someone else. But when it comes to oneself, when it comes to one's own tzaras or whatever it is, suddenly we are blind to it. We can't see it. We have a blind spot for our own stuff. So the Talmud says No self-diagnosis. You gotta take it to somebody else. And somebody else can help share with you what the problem is and the form of correction. So again, from a halachic, from a Jewish legal perspective, the law is very simple, the law is very clear. If a Kohen gets what he thinks is tzaras, he cannot self-diagnose. He must go to another Kohen who can then let him know objectively yea or nay. This is why Judaism teaches. It says in Pirkei Avot, Aseh lecha rav. Make sure you have a rabbi. Ukinei lecha chaver. And have a good friend. These are very important things. What's the message? You have to have people with whom to consult. Because if we're not consulting with others, then the problem is we're stuck in our own perception. We're stuck in our own heads. We're stuck in our own ability to see or not see, our blind spots, and our own self-perception may be jaded. So I'll tell you a story along these lines. When the fifth Chabad Rebbe, known as the Rebbe Rashab, Rabbi Shalom Dovber, when he was 16 years old, he was put in a certain position of leadership by his father, who at that point was the Rebbe. His father, Rabbi Shmuel, the Rebbe Marash, was the fourth Rebbe. He was the fifth. When he was 16 years old, his father, at a young age, he was a prodigy, etc. His father put him in to have some measure of communal responsibility. And there was one thing that he said, amongst many, that I want to point out. And he said like this: he encouraged everybody in the community to have a good friend with which to discuss, I'm going to say the word problems, but I don't mean like, the TV is broken. I don't mean those problems. I mean like the spiritual stuff, like the deeper stuff, to really discuss life and discuss, areas of self-improvement. And it's important to have somebody, a friend with whom to discuss that, to give advice, unbiased, unfiltered, unbiased advice. The way he phrased it was, when two people get together, you have two godly souls against one animal soul. See, usually we each have a godly soul and an animal soul, and there's this battle inside. There's a lot of tension between our higher self and our lower self. But when we get together with a friend, when we get together with someone else, then it's a different equation. We have two godly souls against only one animal soul. Now, obviously, the question is, well, if you're doing the math, if you have two people and two godly souls, well, then you also have two animal souls. If we're just doubling up, right, you have two animal souls also. You don't. The way he explained it is, the godly souls each care about the other. So there you have two, because each one is working for each other. An animal soul, by definition, only works for itself. So the other one's animal soul is not working on your behalf. You have nothing to worry about. So that means for every person, you have your animal soul, right? Your godly soul, and the benefit of their godly soul also to help you. Because godly souls are all about helping and selflessly helping each other and being there for each other. So when you get together with a friend, you discuss self-improvement, character improvement, and spiritual stuff, and just life, right? The deeper stuff in life. You have two godly souls against one animal soul, and a lot can get accomplished with another, more than perhaps can be accomplished on our own. In general, you should know that's why we get together with others. Whether it's physically or virtually, whatever it is, virtually is kind of a new thing, but that's why we get together with others. That's why we study in groups and classes. That's why we pray with community. That's why all sorts of things. That's in general why we need each other, because first of all, we can give each other unbiased opinions, and also because we have on a spiritual level two godly souls against one animal soul. It's easier to commit to something positive, to the next step in a positive way. It's easier to commit to that when you're with somebody else, because, like I just said, you have a preponderance, a majority of godliness, of godly soulness over animal soulness. Okay, that's my second insight. So again, insight number one was regarding skin deep afflictions. Only skin deep. Let's keep it skin deep, which means that inside is pure. Second message is discuss with others and be there for others to discuss. Be that person that someone else can ask you those questions, and you give them unfiltered advice. By the way, let me just quickly add on to that point. It's important when you're discussing with somebody else not to just be a yes person. Yeah, it's good to have friends that agree with you, but that's not always, it's good to have a little pushback, and it's good to hear pushback. It's good to give pushback from somebody that cares about you, because then it's not nasty, it's not coming from a mean place or an angry place or a judgmental place. It's coming from a place of love. But it's really good to give honest critique. If somebody shares with you something, if a good friend shares with you something and a question, and you're inclined to just go along with it because you don't want to make them feel bad or whatever, that's not necessarily ideal. I know as human beings, as friends, we may be inclined to do that, but the best thing that we can do is, I'm not saying to be like nasty and brutal, but to give constructive feedback, and that's healthy, especially when it comes from a place of love. All right, I want to share with you another idea. There is a really interesting, let me pull this up. There's a really interesting law in the Torah portion that talks about, I'm going to find it. Can you guys see the screen? Yes? Okay. Okay, we're going to find it here. When a person sees one of these tsaras blemishes on the skin, then you gotta ascertain it. But there's a wrinkle here that the Torah talks about, which is very interesting. Where is this? I meant to prepare the verse beforehand, and my apologies for not doing that. Let's see. No, I already went past it. It's got to be in, I'm going to say, the second reading. Hold on. Okay, I'm gonna do one more try here, and if not, we're gonna move on. But I'll still share it with you. But here we go. Take a look at verse 12. Okay, this is wild. So if you have a tsaras spot, then you go to the Kohen, and it could be a problem. But look what it says here. Verse 12. And if the tsaras has spread over the skin, whereby the tsaras covers all the skin of the person with the lesion, from his head to his feet, wherever the eyes of the Kohen can see it, then the Kohen shall look at it, and behold, the tsaras has covered all his flesh. He shall pronounce the person with the lesion clean. He has turned completely white. He is clean. You understand what's going on here? If you have a little spot, it's a problem. But if it covers your entire skin, no problem. You're kosher. You're clean. Are you kidding me? Talk about counterintuitive, right? Again, I want to just explain what's going on here. Verse 12 and 13 is talking about tsaras that covers the entire body. Right? Tsaras that covers the entire body. And the Torah says that if it covers the entire body, you do not have tsaras. In other words, if what looks like tsaras covers the entire body, then it's clean. You don't have to be quarantined. The question is why? What's going on? And the many different answers have been given. Because it's very counterintuitive. If you have a small spot, it's a problem. But if it's covering your entire skin, no problem. Life goes on as usual. No quarantine, no ritual, no sacrifices, no nothing. Why? Doesn't make any sense. So I'll share with you one of the explanations that's given. And it's a psychological explanation. You see, if you have a small blemish, so you might be inclined to just, sweep it under the rug, or, shove it into the closet and ignore it. If it's a small blemish. But if it's a big blemish, then you can't ignore it. If you're covered head to toe with tsaras, then you're going to do the work even without being quarantined, because you'll realize that you got to clean up your own act. So when it's a small situation, so we need that encouragement, we need that messaging, that kind of external pressure to say to the person, you got to take care of it, you got to look at it. But when it's a major affliction, then Torah doesn't even need to tell you to take care of it. Torah's like, you're fine. You're not fine, but Torah says, we're not going to give you a protocol because you're going to self-protocol at this point because you realize how serious it is. And I think it's a lesson in life. The smaller things, we might be more inclined to pretend like they don't exist. I mean, when I say smaller things, the smaller challenges, problems, areas of improvement in our character, in our lives, we might be inclined to like, to hand wave it away. Not a big deal. But when it's something major, then we can't help but sit up and take notice and address it. And I think the point here is, number one, the things that need to be addressed, obviously the big things, but I think the lesson is really regarding the smaller things, and that is, let's not, ignore the smaller things because they could lead to big things. And so often human beings have a propensity to ignore until it's a big deal. I mean, this is true when you have a house, when you have a car, right? Do you take care of every little thing or do you wait till it becomes a big thing? So everyone operates a little bit differently, but it's much easier to ignore it when it's small. If not you, right? Because we don't ayin hara, we don't give an evil eye to anybody. But let's say Shmerel, right? Shmerel's driving this car, and the car just, that's it. It's kaput on the highway, and he pulls off. It's not moving anymore. Guess what? He's going to take it into the shop because it's not running anymore. But you know what? If this light goes on, or that light goes on, or goes on intermittently, maybe he'll ignore it. Why? Because it's small. It's a small thing. That's exactly what's going on here. The Torah is telling us when it's a big thing, you're covered head to toe in saras. The Torah doesn't have to tell you to take care of it. You're going to take it into the shop, right? You're going to work on it because you can't not work on it. You're covered from head to toe in saras. So the Torah doesn't have to put you into a protocol. You'll self-protocol. But when it's a small thing, you might ignore it. The Torah says don't ignore it. And that's a message for us. Don't ignore the small signals. The light comes on, even if it goes off in a second. Oh, it's a trigger. It means something, right? Don't ignore the signs, etc. I'm using just a random car example to relate. Okay, Karen, I am unmuting you because I see you've raised your hand.
Yes, I have. So, hello, everyone.
Hey, Karen.
So I have I find it interesting. So the saraf it completely covers your body. I understand what you're saying, that those big issues or flaws we're more aware of, but I also was wondering if you could see it in a more positive light. Sometimes our greatest weakness is our greatest strength, and vice versa. And so I'm thinking about, for example, when I'm interviewing people, and I'll ask people, well, what are your greatest strengths? And they might say, well, I take on more than I can handle,
Right.
and I know I shouldn't do that. But then that becomes their inherent weakness too. So there's beauty. There's this symbiotic relationship between strength and weakness, where that greatest weakness can also be one of the most beautiful things about you, that makes you you. Do you know what I'm saying? That and I think about, when I read this verse, I think about that. I think about in my family, for an example, everyone, my kids tease me all the time that, oh my gosh, I talk so much, right? But then it's so funny because this morning I'm talking to my daughter this morning, and I was silent, and she was like, are you there? Are you okay?
Right.
I mean, in
Right.
other words, it's what they grow to love about me, even though it can be annoying. It's something that's inherently me, right? So, are you getting my drift on that?
Yeah. So what I think you're saying is that maybe the liability is actually the positive, and that's why when you have a lot of it, maybe that's somehow something that's kosher.
Or it's something that
On
makes
some
you
level.
you. It's
Right.
like it's
Yeah, you're
totally
speaking more like, I would say, homiletical, or not necessarily literal, but in the more
homiletical sense.
drush, yeah, and like a midrashic type of way to look at it. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that type of relationship between
Those
assets, liabilities, strengths,
yeah,
weaknesses.
those weaknesses that are your strengths, that the strengths that are your weaknesses. They're sort of like this, semi. And I have one other question, and I just want to know: is it? And you might have said this before because I joined late, but isn't it true that since a Kohen is the only one that can actually diagnose and deem you free, that you, even if that a child, if it's a Kohen, that it's got to be a Kohen, even if it's a Kohen child.
Yes, yes. A Kohen has to be the one to pronounce impure, and pure. Why? Because I actually mentioned this not today, but a few days ago. Because a Kohen is a symbol of love, and if before we send anyone out of the camp, we have to make sure that it's coming from a place of love. It has to be infused and founded upon a solid base of love and care for the other. All too often we reject others because we got upset at them, or because we're disappointed with them, or all sorts of reasons that are more negative in nature. The Torah is telling us the only valid qualification for someone to send someone else out is only if it's coming from a place of love. I mean, this is also a message for educators. You send a kid out of class, you send a kid out of school. It's a big responsibility. It's a big responsibility. Is it coming from a place of love for that person, or is it coming from a place of irritation, frustration, anger, disappointment, etc., etc., etc.? And with families as well. How quick are we to reject, someone, God forbid, in our family because, this, that, or the other? Is it from a place of love? That's the only valid form of rejection, is only when it's a place of love. And I mentioned a few days ago, how is this rejection expressive of love? So if it's coming from love, then it has to be an expression of love. It's an expression of love because this is helping a person get out of that cycle, break the cycle of gossip by putting them in a position where there's no one to talk to. So it's a healing process. It's a process of love that has to be founded on love, and otherwise it's not going to work. It's just going to be something very mean. Well, I want to share one thing, and then we're going to close it out and wish each other a Shabbat Shalom. And that is, I mentioned this Wednesday night, but it's also true in the beginning of the Torah portion, I believe. We'll see this. Yeah, I mentioned this on Monday when it comes to the sacrifice, the offerings that are brought by a mother after childbirth in ancient times. So there was, there was a sheep, a young dove, and a turtle dove. That was what was brought. A sheep, a 1-year-old or a first-year-old sheep, and a young dove or turtle dove. But look at verse 8. And if she cannot afford a sheep, instead of a sheep and a turtle dove or a dove, she should take 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves. The idea is that one is less the birds are less expensive than the animal, so it's either an animal and a bird, or 2 birds if she can't afford it. Okay, and we find this throughout Leviticus, Vayikra. We find many examples of this where the Torah acknowledges that somebody, this is one form of bringing the offering. If you can't afford it, then you can bring. There's another level, another tier, if you will, of the carbon of the offering. What's interesting is this highlights the notion that everyone's different and everyone plugs in or connects on their level. This might be a financial consideration, but in general, it means that everyone's different. And God doesn't put a burden on somebody that's greater than what they not afford, because that's sticking to the finances. But we believe Judaism tells us that God does not give a person a challenge that they cannot overcome. God does not give us a burden that we can't handle. If we have the burden, it means that God believes in us and God knows that we can handle it. It may be very difficult, but we have the capacity to handle it. They tell a story. There's a beautiful story told, and this is how I'll end today's session. It was told by the daughter of the 3rd Chabad Rebbe, who was known as the Tzemach Tzedek. Her name was Devorah Leah. So Devorah Leah told a story that one time, that in the city of Vitebsk, there were 2 men whose name was Hoisha, probably from the name Yoshua. They were known as Hoisha. There was Big Hoisha and Little Hoisha. I don't know if one was physically of bigger stature than the other, but I do know this. They were both in the tea business. Tea as in T-E-A, not the golfing tea. Right, they were in the tea business, and Big Hoisha had a big operation, warehouses, and just a big operation. and little Haisha had a little operation. Maybe that's why they were called big and little. I don't know. But the little Haisha had a small operation. Always paycheck to paycheck, sale to sale. Selling a little tea, getting money to buy more and then to sell it. Okay. Well, one time there was a mishap. I don't remember exactly the story, what the mishap was. Something happened in a warehouse, in a delivery, in a supply, in the product. I don't remember exactly the details, but the entire inventory was shot. And it was Haisha's inventory. So the word goes to little Haisha, your inventory is kaput, is gone. This story, he happened to be traveling. He was visiting the town of Lubavitch at that time, which is why the daughter of the Tzemach actually witnessed the story. She sees him being told this news about his tea. The tea, basically his supply is done, it's destroyed, and he fainted dead. He fainted, not dead, but he fainted, like in a dead faint. Just absolutely, because that was all of his money. He had no other profit other than what he reinvested in that supply. It was gone, and he faints. They revive him, and he faints again. They revive him again, he faints again. It happens over and over and over again. The moment he's revived and remembers what happened with the tea, he faints until the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe, Devorle, his father, wakes him up and says, "Don't worry, it wasn't your tea. It was big Haisha's tea. It wasn't little Haisha. It was big Haisha." And he came to. Later on, the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe, the third Chabad Lubavitch Rebbe, remarked, "Don't worry, or don't think this was a miracle, that somehow I had a vision that they got the wrong Haisha." It turned out that was the case. It was big Haisha's tea. It wasn't little Haisha. Big Haisha had insurance or whatever. He was okay. He was fine with the loss. Little Haisha was fine. He didn't have the loss, and life moved on. The Tzemach Tzedek later on said it wasn't a miracle. I didn't have some sort of spiritual vision of which tea supply got compromised. It was simple. God only gives a challenge to someone, a challenge that they can withstand. When I saw little Haisha repeatedly fainting, I saw clearly that he wasn't able to handle the challenge. I realized it wasn't his challenge. That's why he was fainting, because it wasn't his burden. His challenge he would have been able to withstand. This wasn't his challenge. Or he wasn't able to withstand it. That's how I knew that it wasn't actually his challenge. It was big Haisha's issue. It wasn't little Haisha's issue. That's the story that's told. I will tell you this. Maybe we can find instances, and we have anecdotes, and we have stories of people that weren't able to successfully navigate or to withstand challenges. That's 100% the case. But we believe that a person has the ability to. It may require a lot of help. It may require additional help and assistance from others, etc. But we believe that God doesn't give a person a burden that they absolutely cannot handle. And I think for us, it's really not about anyone else. I know I just mentioned, maybe alluded to others or whatever, but it's really a message for us. When we look at our own challenges, if we believe this idea that God gives us what we can handle, and if we can't handle it, God says, okay, if you can't afford a sheep, bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves. In other words, God's not going to give us a burden that we can't handle. And God knows exactly our composition inside, knows what we can handle. So this can help us withstand the challenges that we have and be successful in navigating them and get to a place of calm and get out of the situation of challenge. So with that, I want to wish you a Shabbat Shalom. May God know what He's doing. May God not give us any challenges that we can't handle. And may we summon the strength to withstand all the challenges that we have and get to a place of no challenge. And let us say Amen. Shabbat Shalom.
Amen.
All right, this officially concludes the Daily Power Parsha, but I'm open to questions or comments.
Ari, I have one thing just to share with everyone.
Yes.
In my rush, is talking about the affliction covered